So today, I wanted to talk about the theme, making Zen your own, and starting with Bodhidharma. And I'm using this book. I think that I mentioned this in an announcement, but it's certainly not required reading, but it's quite enjoyable. So if you have time, if you don't have a huge pile of unread books, you might be interested in this one. Um, yeah, so it's a new book, and it has quite an interesting approach to this information. So here we are at the beginning of a new year, not exactly where we thought we were going to be, and um, so we just keep practicing. That's all. Um, And this book is about our Chinese and Japanese ancestors. It's about 12 of them. So we'll make our way through it. And I'm also using this book, which is I always like to have at least two sources, if I can, from when I'm giving a talk. And this is called The Roaring Stream: A New Zen Reader. And it actually has many more of the ancestors, and is another sort of scholarly view of, but it's just a taste. It's not in depth. So I feel like I don't know much about our ancestors. My root teacher, Grace, didn't focus her teaching on them as such. And most of the time, I couldn't, if she told a story about one of the ancestors, I couldn't remember their names, and I didn't have any feeling for, who they were, or where they lived and what the society was like at the time. And she might talk about the stories as, using them as koans, but and but not so much, as I say, about their lives or the context or where they fit in the history of Zen, and kind of, which overall sort of tells the story about what Zen is in our time. So, and so I must say, part of my motivation for doing this is to fill in some of the blanks in my own, store of information, and to be more conversant, and to be able to recognize who they are if somebody, mentions them in a Dharma talk, or something like that. It's actually common practice in Zen monasteries to chant the names of the ancestors. And many ceremonies include chanting the names of the ancestors. And when you receive the precepts, you get a document that lists all of the ancestors from the Buddha all the way down to you. So, and then when I was preparing for Dharma transmission, in that process, you chant them every day. And I think there are about 150 of them. And then it has been added in recent years a list of female ancestors that has been kind of cobbled together from the rare mentions of women in the ancient writings. Now, one of the things about Zen is that it holds a tradition of unbroken transmission of its teaching from the Buddha to any present day disciple. It's an idea of this unbroken, person to person, very intimate transmission of something that is not really captured in the writings, in the sutras. It's not really captured by words. And so for example, then another thing about Dharma transmissions is you inscribe them, each name, one by one, on silk with ink. All the names from Shakyamuni Buddha down through Dogen to Suzuki Roshi, to his student Sojin Mel Weitzman, to his student Mioan Grace Shearson to her student, Micah Andrea Heaton, and to her student, me. And that's what it looks like. It's just one by one. Now, that doesn't mean that there was only one person who received this profound transmission, but it suggests this sense of this unbroken sense and this deep connection from the beginning, from the Buddha to us right now in the present day. And it's quite a sensation to see your heritage written out like that. So here we are in this little room in Oakhurst, California. And I don't think that Oakhurst, California was in the mind of the Buddha, when he was alive, but here we are. And inheriting a teaching that's over 2,500 years old. And we are the ones who will carry it forward. And it's very interesting to consider, to look at how it was carried forward and what refinements were made over time, and why, in what context were these refinements made. So, as I've said, our ancestry starts with the Buddha, and then after him there are over 20 Indian ancestors. I'm thinking there were 27 or 29, maybe Baika remembers this. And the tradition is that the teaching of Zen, as I said, was transmitted intimately. And then there are some 50 or so Chinese ancestors, another 50 or so Japanese ancestors, and these are all the male ancestors. And then, as I said, there's a smaller document with the female ancestors. Not much is known about the Indian ancestors, because for the first few centuries after the death of the Buddha, there were no written records. But when Zen reached China, there were voluminous written records, and so we have much more information about our Chinese ancestors. Actually, I used to kind of think that, I used to have the impression that Bodhidharma was our first Chinese ancestor, was the single source of bringing Buddhist teachings to China, but that's incorrect. But we have that kind of impression, and that he was the only bridge between India and China, who brought already 1,000-year-old teaching to China. And I visualized him crossing the Himalayas to get to China, and that he was the first and only teacher to come. But that was wrong, actually. Buddhist thought was very well established by the time in China, by the time that Bodhidharma arrived in about 475 of the Common Era. And he actually, and it is said that he traveled by sea for 3 years to get there. And it is thought that he was a real person, as there are historical references to him, contemporaneous references to him. But actually those references were compiled about 500 years later. So it's really hard to know about the historicity of Bodhidharma, but the assumption is that he was a real person. And also, there is a sort of now a coherent narrative of his life, but that again is based on, this not necessarily contemporaneous compiling of the information about him. And it's thought in some ways that the effort was made to describe him and his practice and his teaching in a document that was compiled in about the 11th century, to legitimize and to distinguish Zen from other schools of Buddhism. And I think that is actually quite interesting for us. It's so, because the essence of his teaching is that Zen came to be thought of as a separate transmission outside the sutras, not dependent on words and letters. And based on that famous story of the Buddha holding up a flower and only one of his disciples smiled. So that this transmission was something that happened without words. Now, Chinese culture valued scholarship and study and learning and writing, including translating the Pali Sutras into Chinese. But Bodhidharma's teaching was not scholarly. It was simple, direct, seated meditation facing a wall. And you all know, I think that the word Zen is the Japanese word for the Chinese word Chan, which is the Chinese word for the Sanskrit word jhana, which means meditation. So right away, there is this linguistic focus on the practice of meditation and on the wordless transmission of essential nature, of Buddha nature. So one of the things that distinguished or made Bodhidharma notable was that he was his sitting practice, and it's said that he sat facing a wall in a cave for 9 years, and this became, as I said, the central focus of Zen practice, not learning or study, but a teaching by example and a teaching of something that cannot be expressed in words. And so, but one of the interesting things I think about Jiryu Abel, who's the writer of this book, is to examine why, where, how, and to get he existed, Bodhidharma existed, lived, and to give us a sense of what his experience might have been, and what questions we might ask himself about him and his life that might be relevant to us. Because scripture and stories have to live and be retold and reinterpreted in every generation. So, so some of this abstraction of the nature of his teaching was actually expressed, articulated much later from a different perspective. And in some ways, that's our job too. It's our job to look at our history, our heritage, and say, how does this speak to me? And how do I understand it? And how do I try to offer it? So, in fact, that's how the transmission takes place, with a new understanding in every circumstance. So, Kate, can you put up the picture of Bodhidharma?
I cannot, because I no longer have co-host status. I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry that didn't happen. Well, actually, we don't have a picture of Bodhidharma here, which we probably should. But maybe you can remember. And there's this little figure over here that is, I'll show you. This is definitely a kind of abstraction of what Bodhidharma may have looked like. And of course, the artistic depictions of him, were many, many years after he died. But I don't know if you can see this. This is Daruma, which is, this is a Japanese word, and it's the same as Dharma. And this man has very heavy eyebrows and a thick beard and a big nose, and he has eyes with no eyelids, and that's typical. So when we're done today, maybe you can Google Bodhidharma and see some other pictures of him. So he stood out in China. He looked different. He was furry, and China. My mother used to tell me, because her family were teachers in China for generations, and she used to say that, told me that the Chinese think that call Westerners big nose people. So that's a standout kind of thing. So he didn't have eyelids, because it's said that he cut off his eyelids to keep himself from falling asleep in meditation. And I mean, who knows if that's true? But it demonstrates the strength of his commitment, and probably the kind of person that he was, that he had to do these very drastic things in order to practice. Like people who have to climb mountains, he had to do it. He had to leave his home. He had to go to a foreign country, and he had to cut off his eyelids to 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 practice, and sit facing a fall for 9 years. I expect he got up to go to the bathroom and things like that, but and that maybe somebody, probably a woman, brought him some food from time to time. But anyway, what he did was, this incredible focus where he could sacrifice body parts in order to be more serious. And this dedication to the sitting practice attracted students. There's a story that's told of a student who sought out Bodhidharma in order to become his student, but Bodhidharma refused. And I'll read you the story of what he said. So, and this is from the transmission of the lamp, which was the compilation of Zen history that was done in about the 10th century. So the student said, "Please, Master, have mercy, open the gate of nectar, deliver the message that liberates sentient beings." And the Master said, "The supreme, unequaled spiritual way of the Buddhas is accessible only after vast eons of striving to overcome the impossible and to bear the unbearable. How could a man of small virtue, little wisdom, slight interest, and slow mind attain the true vehicle? Striving for it would be vain effort." After listening to this exhortation from the Master, the student secretly took a sharp knife and cut off his own left arm, placing it in front of the Master. Realizing that he was a good vessel for the Dharma, the Master said, "All Buddhas in search of the way have begun by ignoring their bodies for the sake of the Dharma. Now you have cut off your arm in front of me. You may have the right disposition." And then he went on. The Master then renamed the student Wike. And Wike asked me, and Wike became the second Chinese ancestor. "May I hear about the Dharma seal of the Buddha?" The Master said, "The Dharma seal is not something that can be heard about from others." Wike said, "My mind is not yet at peace. Pray set it at peace for me, Master." The Master said, "Bring me your mind, and I will set it at peace for you." Wike answered, "I have searched for it, but in the end it is unobtainable." The Master said, "Your mind has been set at peace." So this is obviously something that he was transmitting that actually cannot be transmitted by words. And there's something about just relaxing into the great mind, great awakened mind, just relaxing into it. That is the teaching. That is unobtainable by grasping for it. And so then Bodhidharma's reputation grew, and the emperor, who is a devout Buddhist, sent for him. And here's a story about his encounter with the emperor. Bodhidharma stood before the emperor, who said to him, Since coming to the throne, I've had temples built, sutras translated, and monks ordained. So this is the kind of activity and study that was valued by the Chinese. Tell me, what merit have I gained? No merit at all, replied Bodhidharma. And but the emperor was, not actually offended by that, and he said, "Why no merit?" And this was a legitimate question because the emperor had been taught that one's good deeds acquired merit. And Bodhidharma said, these works of merit are all illusions and are not real. And then he asked, so the emperor asked, so what is the meaning then of the holy truths? Bodhidharma replied, vast emptiness, nothing holy. And then the emperor asked, who is this who stands before me? And Bodhidharma said, I don't know. So he wasn't going to get caught into a bunch of, esoteric teachings and things like that. He was just there, just who he was, and not acquiring merit, and just being the one carrying the transmission. So what are we to make of Bodhidharma's life and these stories and what they imply for us? And several issues arose for me. One is the idea of home leaving. And traditionally, to become a disciple of the Buddha, you had to leave home, abandoning a life of family and the marketplace. But is that what we have to do? I don't think so. I think the implication for us is somewhat different. There is a sense of leaving something, of putting something behind and going forward into something new. Maybe we've left another religion. Maybe a sense of, maybe we've left the rituals and beliefs of our parents. Maybe we've abandoned a life of pleasure and desire and their satisfactions. Maybe we've worked hard to move away from a self-centered, ego-driven life. And for what? For what have we done this? There's no gain and there's no merit. And what does that mean? What hidden depths does that point to? And how do we find it? And I think this is the question that Bodhidharma leaves for us, is this open-ended question. Where is it? And how do I find it? And what about our dependence on words? How often I've felt that if I could put enough words around my experience, I would understand myself. But the words are just sounds, just objects of mind, and don't have any reality in themselves. What about the eyelids and the arm? Is it something drastic necessary for enlightenment? And what could that mean for us? So what I thought about this is, it's about renunciation, and in what I may have renounced in favor of following the Zen path. I remember after I'd been a student for a few years, I had this feeling, I'm realizing my inner nerd. I'd lived a life of a professional woman, and I would wear office attire, business attire to work and conduct myself professionally, and I always wore makeup. You didn't see me without face makeup. So one of the things that I renounced in following the Zen path was makeup. I wanted to see if just being myself, my own appearance without any enhancement, was enough. And also it had a sort of an overtone of vanity, and I wanted to see if I could abandon that, if I could move away from that. I remember another example was, I remember Grace saying that she and her husband no longer stayed out late on Saturday evening because they wanted to be fresh for Sunday meditation, for the Sunday meditation program. They just, they let go of something that had been part of their life in order to live a new life in some way. And so when you start to have some realization, you start to have some awareness of your life and its contents, sometimes you shift towards something that you feel is more important and more valuable and deeper. Maybe you give up presumptions of privilege, or presumptions of being an exception, that you don't have to abide by certain rules that are uncomfortable for you. So there are all kinds of ways in which we, cut off part of our defended ego-driven self, that we renounce, that we abandon in order to practice. And maybe you've thought of some of your own decisions that you've made to, to move in a direction that seems more meaningful and that's really addressing the deep existential problems of our lives. So definitely, I'm not advocating cutting off your arm or cutting off your eyelids. But what are you willing to renounce in order to follow the way? What is really important for you to do in order to follow the way? And then if it's so hard, if it takes eons and kalpas, and it takes so long, does it seem like it's worth it, in our little lives? Does it seem like it's worth it? And it seems like the implication is we're not going to get there this go round. But so why would you continue to do it? What's does that make any sense? And when you could just be out having fun. Well, actually, maybe you're the culmination of eons already. Maybe you've already exhausted a whole bunch of them, and you don't have to imagine it, sitting uncomfortably with your legs hurting for, way down in the future, beyond your visibility. So maybe if you're the culmination of eons already, well, then you can jump in now, and it'll be over. The suffering will be over, right? I mean, this, whether or not you believe in rebirth or anything like that, we don't have to let that idea scare us. And also, maybe actually eons are all right now, maybe, time is going, instead of going like this, maybe it's going like this, and it's all right here, right now. So if maybe you are encompassing all the eons right now, and you don't have to worry about how long it's going to take. So, so we are Bodhidharma's fellow travelers. We're Bodhidharma's heirs of this transmitted teaching. And another thing that I thought of, I came across this little quote this week, because I think maybe another thing that people find themselves having to renounce is sometimes it's the case that your relationships with friends might change, because what you're doing with your life is different from theirs and not as fun, maybe. And it might seem weird. It certainly seems weird to my kids, for example. So, I think maybe Bodhidharma might have felt something like this. I mean, maybe he felt really weird and different in China, you know. And so this, I got, this was from Facebook this past week. It says, if you want to know who your tribe is, speak your truth. Then see who sticks around. Those are the people who get a spot in your blanket fort. So, you know, and I mean, it takes courage to do this practice, and it takes courage to renounce things that have been your refuge in the past, and to separate yourself from these refuges in order to find something deeper and more true and more lasting. And it's a little scary because not everybody is there with you. So I found this little quote quite consoling. And I think that's what Bodhidharma did. He just sat, and then people came. So we have to be who we are, and who we are with our small self and our big self, with our relative self and our absolute self, is the true expression of the Dharma. So I think that's part of what Bodhidharma's teaching was. And so my question for you is, where do you meet Bodhidharma as your fellow traveler on the way? It looks like I've talked too long. I have 57, so it's only 3 minutes left. My apologies. So quick. I'm sorry?
Kate has a question.
Okay, go. You're muted.
I have the skills back so I can show the picture if you'd like.
Oh, okay, thanks. Anybody else have a comment while Kate's getting things going? Okay, so there he is.